Never take our eye off the issue of election integrity. It is a constant battle to keep the laws enforced, to keep common sense in the balloting of our great elections. Our next guest is somebody who's on the forefront of making sure that that happens. He has done more than anyone I can think of to clean up voter rolls all around this country, to create transparency in our elections. He also is making sure that people aren't intimidated at the polls or even when they're thinking of going to the polls. One of the most important voices I've ever met in election integrity. I've known him for more than 2 decades. He's currently leading the Public Interest Legal Foundation, which does a lot of great work. He's our good friend, J. Christian Adams. Good to have you back on.
Hey, John. Great to be here.
All right, let's get started. There's a lot of places to go because you're working on so many exciting things. Let's start down in Texas. You are working on a very important voter privacy issue down in Texas that I don't think a lot of people know about.
Yeah, I can look up how you voted if you live in Texas. I'm not kidding. I know that sounds completely bonkers.
That's crazy.
I was a skeptic. Texas does not have a secret ballot because of 2 things. Number one, the early voting centers and the computers, how you generate a ballot. It's too complicated to do on this show to explain every nook and cranny, but trust me, I didn't believe it, but it's true. So if you vote early in Texas, we can look up your ballot. In fact, 30,000 ballots we have available. The governor, his wife, the chairman of the Texas Republican Party, Matt Rinaldi, his ballot was looked up. It is a violation, in our view, of political privacy rights.
That is just crazy. So what's the next step? You bring a suit in one city and try to get it before the courts?
Yeah, we did. We sued in federal court in Harris County, the United States District Court that just happens to be in Houston. And Harris County is one of the places that chose, and that's important, chose to go to this system of voting that lets us look up how people voted. And we're alleging in federal court that there's a violation of our First Amendment rights to association and political privacy. Now, the defendants, John, and some, frankly, it's not a surprising argument, say there is no such thing as political privacy, that if a state wanted to make your vote public, they could. And we're going to find out because we briefed it heavily. We're in front of a very good judge in Harris, federal court in Harris County in Houston. So we'll see.
That is amazing. And I think if you polled 10 people on the street, all 10 would say, of course we have voter privacy. So this will be a shocker. We'll be keeping a close eye on that. That's a really important one. In fact, I think we have a story.
You and your listeners will think of 1,000 ways this can be abused. Hiring newspaper reporters. How about that? They allegedly, judges, lawyers, priests, college admissions. I mean, you will just start thinking of ways that this is abusive.
Oh, yeah. This has huge implications all around. All right. Another one that you're working on, and it goes back to perhaps the first time I ever encountered you, which is when you were the head of the voting rights section at the Justice Department, and there was some voter intimidation going on in Philadelphia back in 2008's election, if I remember correctly. New stuff coming around today. You get some new voter intimidation out there.
Yeah, and look, we kind of sat on this through the election for a variety of reasons, but people in Philadelphia, around Philly, were getting letters in the mail. We have them, like with stamps, threatening to kill them because they were Trump supporters. I guess they had signs or flags or something. And it said that, in the dead of a winter night, you'll never know when it's going to happen, but we're going to come after you and your family and shoot your cat. And these were honest to God. We have the letters. And we're filing a voter intimidation case, just like we did with the new Black Panther Party back in 2009, as you recall. And we're alleging that you aren't allowed under federal law to threaten to kill people if they say they want to vote for Trump. It just doesn't work that way in America. You actually cannot intimidate people with death threats if they want to vote. And by the way, where is the Pennsylvania Josh Shapiro on this? Like, wasn't he just grandstanding about, political rhetoric and toning it down? Well, here we go, Josh. How about the Pennsylvania State Police who've done nothing?
Nothing at all, right? Yeah. And do we know who the perpetrator was? It an organized group doing it or just individuals?
Well, we hope to find out exactly who. We also want to find out what the Pennsylvania State Police and the Postal Inspectors are doing. It shouldn't be up to private groups like the Public Interest Legal Foundation to get to the bottom of death threats in a federal election.
Yeah, so very important. Speaking of Pennsylvania, back in the fall, there was some concerns about an improper voter registration drive, perhaps. I haven't heard anything since the election on that. Is there any visibility that we've seen there?
Well, this is typical, isn't it? I mean, everybody pays attention right before an election to shenanigans, but then you have to follow through, and that's why. Look, this is a odd-numbered year endeavor, right? You can't just worry about elections in even-numbered years, and that's why we exist as a C3, because we do this continuously. And no, I haven't seen anything at all done about that, what was reported in the fall.
Just remarkable. Just crazy stuff. All right, let's get up to speed on all the great voter roll information you're doing, because making sure the voter rolls are clean and that they're transparent for the American public is one of the great protections we have for election integrity. You've got a case out in Hawaii that seems as though Hawaii doesn't want to comply with the rest of the country's rules, huh?
Yeah, I mean, look, both going to the courts of appeal, one in South Carolina to the Fourth Circuit, Hawaii to the Ninth. Hawaii basically said, we don't care about federal law. We're not going to give you the statewide voter roll. You have to go to the counties in Hawaii, which, of course, is like the hardest place maybe next to Alaska to go county by county, and go ask them for the voter roll. Like, hey, have you not noticed Motor Voter been on the book for 30 years? There's a bunch of cases on it. You got to give us this stuff. Hawaii thumbed their nose at us. And unfortunately, a district court judge ruled in their favor. Federal court judge in Honolulu said, nope, you have to go to the counties. I'm like, okay, we're going to go to the Ninth Circuit. Same thing in South Carolina, John. South Carolina limited transparency to only registered voters in South Carolina. Only they could find out what was on the voter rolls. Well, what if they denied your registration, right? Like, you were the wrong race in 1950 and we're not going to register you. Well, you're not allowed to see it. I mean, so South Carolina lost. I argued it and beat them in federal court. And then amazingly, they decided to waste taxpayer money, and they're appealing this to the Fourth Circuit to try to hide voter rolls from anybody out of state. They say federal law doesn't apply, that federal law can be trumped by state law. I thought they quit making that argument in 1861, but apparently not.
It's just crazy. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, except it's really real. I mean, it's going on. As you step back from the smoke of the 2024 election, there's a lot of lessons that were learned. Republicans proved to themselves they can get in the early voter game and be effective. We learned that there are lots of places that we can force changes on the voter rolls. We found out that when you increase election integrity, voter turnout goes up. Georgia, perhaps the best example of that. What are the biggest things that you lie awake up thinking about in the 2026 election, the midterm elections, where Congress will be up for grabs?
Well, look, there's still a lack of transparency in states like Wisconsin and Minnesota and New Hampshire, because they're exempted from NVRA. In the transparency provisions of Motor Voter that we use, 6 states are exempted. That's why we're challenging in federal court those exemptions. It's sort of like Shelby v. Holder, like a violation of equal sovereignty. We'll see what happens there. But I worry about pockets of no transparency. Utah, for example. Pay attention to Utah. They have a law that allows you to shut the switch off on the public nature of your voter record. So they've got 40% of voters in Utah that are hiding that we can't see. So there's still transparency problems. I'll tell you some good news. I think we learned in 2 elections that the deeper we dive into the electorate, the more people that vote, the more people that get registered to vote, the more conservatives win. And I think this is very hard for some people to swallow, because they're stuck in the paradigm of what the left told us was the truth, which is, the country's changing, race is going to decide everything, and we need everyone to register to vote. I think they are learning a hard lesson on the left, that there's more of us than there are of them. And that the deeper we dive into the electorate, the more people who vote, and Trump proved this, the more conservatives win elections.
That's wild. It's really true. It's funny. The basics of blocking and tackling elections, conservatives got away from in the 80s in the Reagan machinery. They had all the blocking and tackling down, and they knew the basics of it. And I think the left got really good at it, to be honest with you. And it just seems like in the last couple of years, people have been on the right have been listening to great advice. You've given them and other very smart people, and they're getting back to the basics of blocking and tackling. But you can't have a star running back in football if you don't have a line in front of you. And I think that seems to be one of the big lessons of the 24 election, which is that the basics really matter a lot. Do you see any loss of momentum on Republicans getting more engaged on, just the old-fashioned get out the vote?
Yeah, I love the blocking and tackling analogy, and I will show you an example of bad news. Public Interest Legal Foundation monitored the Wisconsin Supreme Court election 2 weeks ago. We had attorneys in the polls monitoring that election with DOJ-style coverage, which means we actually write everything down. We have a whole form system, and we go to polls, important polling places. We don't go to like the country club polls. We go to the real battle spaces. And I will tell you, John, we're like the only people there. Nobody was blocking and tackling in the polls. And yeah, it was depressing. And we're going to do a whole report on this. We did something similar in Michigan. We monitored elections in Detroit back in November, a report coming out imminently on that. But the Wisconsin experience is like, why on earth would there not be people in these polls monitoring all day long besides a bunch of C3 charity lawyers from, Alexandria, Virginia? And that's what we saw.
Yeah. Boy, that's a warning sign going into 26 and 28. How quickly people forget, I guess. It's a little bit disappointing. You have done, along with many other people, a look at a lot of the dark money that is in the system that gets around not only disclosure, but regulation. The 1630 fund, other places are spending lots of money on it. Is there any better sense, and it looks like some of it could be foreign money, obviously not prohibited. Is there any cases you're watching or anything you're doing to try to rein in that dark money?
Well, first of all, I'll give you some, I guess, bad news and bad news. I don't think that dark money is going away. And there's only so much you can do about it, right? What you need to do is set up counter structures that are more efficient and don't rely on this huge amount of money, that are nimble, effective, and have a punch without requiring as much money. And that's what I think the right has done. I will tell you, and this sounds conspiratorial, so, Right Wing Watch, get your tape recorder ready. I don't see how this couldn't be sovereign. There's so much money on the left. There's just so much money. And we know, for example, China 100% has an influence campaign through various structures. That was just testimony in Congress last week on that. It's great coverage from folks, as you know, over at the Washington Times, like Bill Gertz. Why would China stop at, let's not fund organizations that are in the election space? Like, why would that be their line where they go, no, we can't go there. We go everywhere else, but we can't go there. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it seems improbable, right? They're almost certainly involved in it. Yeah. Well, that's why I think the Act Blue investigation that Congress is doing, looking at that possibility of foreign involvement, these are like really important moments in terms of getting a sense of where our vulnerabilities are in the election integrity system. It'll be very interesting to see where things up. I want to turn to something that doesn't get a lot of attention, but I think it's one of the more important ones, the Petaway decision, which I think came out of the Fifth Circuit, if I remember correctly. It is a whole new way of looking at the Voting Rights Act. And I know there's a lot of people that have concern about it. Talk a little bit about what could be at stake here and whether this gets to the Supreme Court or not.
Well, I think our opponents, and Petaway, it's in Galveston County, Texas. Public Interest Legal Foundation represented Galveston County, and we made an argument in the case. They were being sued under the Voting Rights Act because they redistricted and didn't create a race-based district. And so what happens is when that happens, of course, all the organizations out there, the lefties, bring lawsuits. And we made an argument in the case that you aren't allowed to combine blacks and Hispanics to get over your 50% to create a district. And I don't, this is a really complicated area of law. It's almost more complicated than the secret ballot issue I didn't want to explain earlier. But the point is, that we said, hey, you got to take blacks alone or Hispanics alone. You can't like gang them up to be like against like the white candidates. Like that is not what the Voting Rights Act is about. And so we represented Galveston County. We made this argument. The Fifth Circuit in Bonk, which is the big federal circuit, the Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, rewrote the Voting Rights Act and agreed with us and said, you're right. You cannot combine races to just basically go after white seats. And that's not what the Voting Rights Act was all about. It's the Petaway decision. That's what you talked about. And they haven't appealed because they're scared to death. People like Chad Dunn at the UCLA Voting Rights Project, who was in the case, they know if this goes to the Supreme Court, what's going to happen, because they rely on these coalition districts in other parts of the country that haven't struck them down yet. So I think, John, that it's totally going to alter congressional makeup. There's no question. State legislatures, school board even, county councils all through Texas are going to change because of this decision where you stop, basically having like let's have blacks and Hispanics gang up on whites, for political power. That's what was happening. And this Petaway decision is going to change all that.
Yeah. It's one to keep a close eye on it. It sounds obtuse on the front of it, but its implications for the future of election integrity are really, really serious and really, really weighty. I want to turn to one last one that brings us back to a part of the conversation we started with on voter intimidation. There was a article written on Substack over the last couple of weeks where a George Mason University student, I think he might be a PhD candidate now, suggested that it might be okay to kill Trump supporters in order to, quote, protect the Constitution. And what's most interesting is that he has amended the article now, doubling down on it, saying it's, it has to be narrowly targeted, but it's okay to use. I just don't know in what world we're living in where people have now come to be able to use a public forum and suggest that killing your political opponents is part of an operation or part of something that's morally correct.
Yeah, let's tell everybody what the headline is, and you know how important headlines are. The headline was, when can we start killing them, right? And it was written by a PhD student at George Mason as a solution to deal with people he disagrees with, is to kill them. So he's a PhD candidate at George Mason who wasn't even ashamed of it. After he got national attention, he, like you said, he rewrote the article and made it even more extremist. Look, John, here's the lesson. We always knew who these people were. They have a pedigree. It goes back to 1917. It goes back to 92. And when they find people they disagree with and they get power, they thrust them into guillotines or march them against the wall. It's what the left has always done. And so this article is merely confirmation that in their dark hearts of hearts, they actually will turn to murder for political ends. I mean, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest.
It is just stunning in reading it, though. I mean, just to read the words are very chilling, and there's not any ambiguity about what's being said there. It's a moment in history where if there isn't reckoning at the universities and other places, this is going to become even more and more endemic. I fear that the more we allow it to go unpunished, the more it's likely to spread. It's really something else. Christian, for all the great work you do, what's the fastest way for people to stay in touch with what you do personally and what PILF does every day?
Publicinterestlegal.org. It's our website. You can join our mailing list, publicinterestlegal.org.
Yeah, one of the most important organizations in America, and also one of the most accurate. I know there are a lot of people that are in the election integrity space or claim to be in the election integrity space, but the record of accuracy, your record of precision, your record of victory, the wins that you rack up are just remarkable and really affirmation of the care you bring to this issue. It's such a great honor to have you on the show today.
John, thank you for having me.
Yeah, good conversation. I'm still scratching my head about the voter privacy. That's one that's going to get a lot of attention.